Yeah, thank you, Oliver. And there's some interesting points there, and that trauma and traumatic events and our reactions to traumatic events can cover a very wide range of experiences. And there's what sort of the big T trauma, if you like, which is the more, extreme end of the stick, sort of, war and violence. But there's also, as you say, this lady who was pregnant, whose relationship crashed and created this, sufficient pressure and sufficient fear, I guess, in her uncertainty of the future to cause recurring problems. And you also mentioned, I think, really sort of the overlap with symptoms with sort of depression and anxiety. And the dictionary definition at the start, mentioned anxiety specifically, but people present trauma in different ways. And one of the things that can make it very difficult to spot is that people can often not know, they don't recall, certainly not clearly or possibly not at all, the events that are still causing this dysregulation in their sort of mental landscape and their physical landscape. So I suppose in an objective sense, trauma in a post-traumatic stress disorder sense is the body and the mind not realizing that the danger has passed. That's often a description that's used for trauma. So the body, the mind is recreating the experience, but often in a very broken, discombobulated, disordered way, because the memories haven't been stored accurately. And it's also worth pointing out, I think, at this point, that two people or multiple people can go through exactly the same or virtually identical experiences, to the extent that we can have an identical experience. And some people will develop a stress disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, and some people won't. Some people will recover from it in a more typical way, for want of a better expression. And the ins and outs of that are not fully understood, I don't believe, but there's strong correlation, I understand, with people who experience something so horrific for them personally. And again, that's a subjective, and again, these things are universally terrible, let's agree. However, subjectively, it feels so bad that they disassociate from that experience. So victims of these things often describe sort of feeling that they're out of body experiences. So they're watching something happen to themselves rather than it happening to them, rather than being in the experience. And that I understand, I believe, is supposed to be the sort of the body, the mind's attempt to protect itself from something so horrific, so overwhelming. But it's that disassociation that is believed, I think, and the research is always ongoing in this framework, so it's always worth stating on all of these discussions that we have, that the research is always ongoing, and there's always new theories and new studies, new evidence, particularly in the land of neuroscience. But I think it's believed that this disassociation prevents the memories being stored effectively in the brain, probably through the hippocampus, and this means that the subject is the person is subject then to flashbacks and nightmarish dreams which they can't make sense of. And that's particularly the case if they don't remember the events, or the disassociation and the memories become blocked again, because the event is so personally horrific that they just aren't ready to face it, can't face it. And this isn't a conscious choice. None of this is conscious. And so this is blocked within their mind unconsciously and comes out in echoes through their life. And that can manifest itself in a number of different ways, such as anxious behavior, anger, violent outbursts. You hear that typically in stories of military personnel experiencing PTSD. That often manifests itself in outbursts of violence. But it's not defined to that, and it's not limited to that. There's a whole raft of ways that that people can present. And some people can present very effectively in certain areas of their life, certain contexts. So there are lots of accounts of people who've suffered traumatic events who can perform seemingly very effectively in a work environment, for example, but their home life, which maybe isn't as regular as in organized, isn't as certain, because our social dynamics, particularly with family, can be some of the most challenging in our lives. That's where they can fall apart, and that's where it can manifest as experienced problems.